The film opens with a haunting view of a vast, desolate desert. The landscape is an endless stretch of sand and heat, where not a single soul can be seen for miles. Yet, in the middle of this absolute void stands a stunning, ultra-modern luxury villa. The silence of the wasteland is suddenly shattered by the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades as a chopper descends in front of the house. Out step Richard and Jennifer, a couple looking for an escape. Richard is a wealthy, powerful businessman who is already married. Jennifer is his secret mistress. They have come to this secluded paradise to spend a wild, hedonistic weekend away from the eyes of the world. As they disembark, the pilot hands Richard a welcoming gift, a packet containing a potent hallucinogenic drug known as peyote. Once inside, the two lose themselves in their private world of romance. However, the mood shifts the following morning. Jennifer heads to the kitchen looking for breakfast, but the fridge offers nothing but bottles of wine. She settles for some water and a few pieces of fruit from the table. As she glances toward the window, her heart sinks. Two men are standing outside, clutching rifles and staring at her with predatory, unsettling gazes. Panicked, she calls out for Richard. He calmly approaches and opens the door, revealing that these men are not intruders, but his hunting buddies, Stan and Dimitri. Richard introduces Jennifer as a friend who joined him for a quick getaway, masking the true nature of their relationship. That night, as the group gathers to talk, Stan and Dimitri's eyes fixate on the peyote drug. Richard warns them of its power, explaining that while it can numb all physical pain, it is extremely dangerous and can even lead to death. He instructs Jennifer to hide it somewhere safe. She tucks the drug into her locket and returns to the group, where she begins to dance. Captivated and losing his inhibitions, Stan begins to dance aggressively with her until Richard intervenes, sweeping Jennifer up and taking her to his room. The next morning, Jennifer wakes up to find Richard's side of the bed empty. When she wanders out, she finds Stan eating alone. He tells her that Richard went out to handle some business and Dimitri is passed out drunk. As Jennifer checks her phone, she feels Stan's intense, unblinking stare burning into her. Feeling deeply uncomfortable, she announces that she wants to go home and heads to her room to pack. While she is mid-change, Stan forces his way into the room. He begins speaking to her in a vulgar manner, his touches becoming forceful and inappropriate. Dimitri happens to walk by and sees what is happening, but Stan coldly orders him away. Instead of helping, Dimitri turns his back on her cries, cranking up the TV volume to drown out the noise before heading to the shower. Left helpless, Jennifer is brutally assaulted by Stan. Later, Richard returns to find an eerie silence in the house. Seeing the tension on Stan and Dimitri's faces, he demands to know what happened. Stan vaguely mentions that Jennifer is upset. When Richard finds her, she is broken and sobbing. She tells him the horrific truth of what Stan did and begs him to call the helicopter to take her home immediately. At first, Richard is furious and berates Stan, but his concern soon takes a dark, calculated turn. He returns to Jennifer and tells her he has fixed everything. He claims he has transferred a massive sum of money to her account and arranged a high-paying job for her in Canada. He urges her to take the money, move away, and forget that any of this ever happened. Jennifer is revolted by the offer. She refuses to be silenced with blood money and demands to be taken home, threatening that if he doesn't, she will call his wife and reveal everything. Enraged that his perfect life is being threatened, Richard strikes her across the face, warning her never to involve his family. Terrified for her life, Jennifer takes off running into the desert. Richard and his friends give chase, hunting her like prey. Eventually, she finds herself trapped at the edge of a towering cliff. Richard tries to play the diplomat one last time, apologizing for hitting her and pretending to call the pilot, promising the chopper will be there in 30 minutes. But the moment Jennifer lowers her guard, Richard lunges forward and brutally pushes her off the precipice. She falls through the air, her body slamming into a dead tree at the bottom, where a sharp, jagged branch impales her through the torso. Looking down from the height, Richard justifies his actions to his shaken friends, telling them he did this so they wouldn't spend the next 15 years in prison. He coldly instructs them on their cover story: they were just out hunting, and they know absolutely nothing about the girl. Leaving Jennifer impaled and seemingly dead, the three men set to work methodically erasing every trace of her existence. They gathered her belongings, her clothes, everything, and watched them burn, thinking they were safe. But the desert wasn't finished with Jennifer. As the sun beat down, ants began to crawl across her supposedly lifeless body. But the pain, as agonizing as it was, became her wake-up call. Clenching her jaw against the excruciating agony, she managed to locate her lighter. She ignited the very branch piercing her torso. As the fire weakened the wood, it finally snapped, and she collapsed to the desert floor. Weak and broken, she began to crawl. The sound of an engine cut through the silence. Richard, Stan, and Dmitri were back, scouring the area for her body. Realizing they were near, Jennifer summoned her last ounce of strength and hid behind a large rock. Richard, upon finding the impaled tree empty, lost all composure. The realization that she was still alive sent a wave of panic through him. He knew they were dead men walking if they didn't finish her off. The search intensified, stretching into the night. Their break came when they discovered fresh bloodstains on the rugged desert path. Following the trail, they tracked her all the way to the edge of a winding river. But there, the trail went cold. They had no idea which way she had gone. The three men held a tense council. They needed a strategic plan. They decided Stan would stand guard right there at the river, while Richard and Dmitri would split up and search in opposite directions. As Richard and Dmitri began their solitary hunts, Jennifer was in a different world, a world of pure, unadulterated pain. The jagged piece of wood was still buried in her flesh. Suddenly, the rumble of a vehicle echoed. Dmitri was heading right for her. She scrambled to hide behind a rock. When Dmitri stopped the truck and got out to investigate, Jennifer saw her chance. She crept toward the vehicle, managing to grab his shotgun. With trembling hands, she aimed and pulled the trigger. Click, the gun was empty. Dmitri, realizing what had happened, laughed and brutally knocked her to the ground. He immediately radioed Stan, telling him he had found her. Stan, finally feeling the weight lift, leaned back in his truck and put on some music. But back at the river, Dmitri was sadistically torturing Jennifer, repeatedly dunking her head underwater. Fighting for her life, her fingers closed around Dmitri's own knife, which was tucked into his boot. In one desperate, primal move, she plunged the blade into his eye. Dmitri's agonizing screams echoed as he stumbled backward and collapsed into the river, where he quickly drowned. As Dmitri's body vanished beneath the current, Jennifer didn't hesitate. She grabbed his truck keys and sped away. Her hope was short-lived, though. The truck sputtered and died a few miles later, out of gas. Forced onto foot once more, she eventually found refuge in a secluded cave. Rummaging through Dmitri's bag, which she'd taken from the truck, she found nothing of use but a can of beer. Overwhelmed by hunger and thirst, she cracked it open and drank. Every gulp was punctuated by a tear. The excruciating pain in her abdomen was almost too much to bear. It was then she remembered the peyote drug she had hidden in her locket. Remembering Richard's warning about its potency, she decided she had no other option. She swallowed the drug. Within minutes, the hallucinogenic effects kicked in, and the pain mysteriously vanished. Empowered by the drug and a sudden, fierce resolve, she used the knife to widen her own wound. With a grimace, she extracted the jagged branch. The wound bled profusely. Thinking quickly, she used a sharp rock to cut a strip from the beer can. She heated the metal with her lighter until it glowed red and then pressed it against the gaping wound, effectively cauterizing it. The blinding flash of agony was followed by darkness as she finally collapsed into a deep sleep. The next morning, Stan was sound asleep in his truck when Richard suddenly threw the carcass of a dead animal into the front seat, jolting him awake. Shaken, Stan ran down to the river to wash the fear and the stench from his face. But as he looked into the water, he froze. Dimitri's body had bloated and risen to the surface. He scrambled back in terror. Richard, witnessing this, finally understood the truth: they were no longer the hunters. Jennifer was hunting them. Desperate to cover their tracks, they began filling Dimitri's clothing with heavy stones, working together to sink his body deep into the river. Stan, terrified and breaking down, began blaming Richard for everything. Richard's response was a brutal, vicious beating that left Stan with a shattered nose. Despite the internal fracture, they both knew they had only one option: they had to find and kill Jennifer. Meanwhile, Jennifer woke with a start from a terrifying dream, a dream where Richard found her and shot her dead. As she examined herself, she saw that her wound was already healing, albeit with a strange, permanent brand, the logo from the beer can burned into her skin. Armed with weapons she'd scavenged, she used a pair of binoculars to survey the area. She watched as Richard and Stan split up. Richard was heading east, but Stan was still right there, staring into his rearview mirror at his broken nose. Jennifer realized she could see his exact location in the mirror's reflection. As Stan's truck began to move, she moved with it, shadowing his every turn. Fortune favored her when Stan's truck also ran out of gas. As he got out and began siphoning fuel from a can, Jennifer saw her moment. She fired, but her shot went wild, hitting him in the shoulder instead of the head. Wounded and panicked, Stan took off running. Jennifer followed the trail of his blood. But Stan was smarter than she anticipated. He tore off one of his socks and tied it tightly over the wound, stopping the blood trail and throwing her off his scent. High up on a rock formation, Stan lay in wait. When Jennifer appeared, he fired. The bullet whizzed past her head, grazing her ear. He unleashed a barrage of gunfire, but Jennifer was quick, diving behind cover. As she ran, she strategically dropped sharp shards of glass from her flashlight along the path. Stan, giving chase, didn't see the trap. He screamed as the glass shredded his bare feet, slowing him to a crawl. Screaming in rage and agony, he managed to get back to his truck and began using it as a battering ram, trying to run her down. But Jennifer, standing firm on the path, calmly waited. When the truck got close enough, she fired her third and final shot, hitting him directly in the head. Stan was dead. Taking Stan's truck, Jennifer drove directly to Richard's luxury villa. Inside, Richard was frantically packing, having already called the pilot for an immediate extraction. He was in the shower, trying to wash away the weekend, when he heard the distinct sound of someone entering the house. Heart pounding, he grabbed his shotgun and stepped out into the hallway. And there she was, standing directly in front of him. Before he could speak a single word, she fired, a bullet ripping through his abdomen. Richard fired back, but Jennifer was already behind a sofa. Critically wounded and bleeding heavily, Richard began to crawl across the floor. Jennifer didn't rush. She just followed the smeared trail of his blood, a hunter closing in on her prey. Richard tried to wrap the wound with a plastic bag to slow the bleeding, the fear evident in his eyes. The terrifying game of cat and mouse inside the house finally ended when Jennifer cornered him. However, as she moved in for the kill, she slipped on a patch of his blood. Seizing the opportunity, Richard attacked, pinning her down. His hands wrapped around her throat, choking the life out of her. In a last, desperate act, Jennifer drove her hand into his fresh abdominal wound, squeezing. The unimaginable pain forced him to break his grip. That single, precious second was all she needed. Jennifer grabbed the gun and fired point-blank into his chest. Richard collapsed, dead instantly. Covered in the blood of her enemies, Jennifer, the girl they had tried to kill, walked out of the villa. As she emerged, she heard the approach of the rescue helicopter, its rotors a signal that the nightmare was over. The story of a brutal betrayal and a woman's merciless revenge had come to its end.